Tanakota Katwa, namaskar. Hello, everybody. Hi. So I am Kanhika Nikam, and I would like to start today by sharing a little bit about myself. So my family comes from the Sahyadri Mountains up on the Western Ghats in India. It's a beautiful natural world heritage site, a UNESCO natural world heritage site. It is, I only learned recently in preparation for this talk, which is very unfortunate, that it's one of the world's top 8 biodiversity hotspots. It's pretty impressive. Here, my ancestors were farmers who turned warriors to protect their land from the many invasions prior to colonization. Not too far from the mountains is the bustling, crazy city of Mumbai, where I was born and brought up. I traveled across India to learn, to study, to make friends, before making my way to the other end of the world in California. Here, I've had some formative experiences in my life. I found my calling as a design researcher the first time I felt like, yes, I can do something that I feel great doing, and I can earn money for that. That's awesome. I also met my husband here, Will, wherever he is, somewhere, Will, and followed him to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Much to my parents' dismay. I think initial dismay, they do like you now. What are you doing following this guy to New Zealand? Where is New Zealand? So far away. I couldn't be more grateful to be where I am right now, doing the work that I'm doing with a purpose-led organization like Springload. My work at Springload gives me immense joy, and you will see the kind of exploration that I've gotten deep into with the encouragement of my colleagues and my friends at my workplace. I'm here today to talk about, is bias always bad? I think we can very safely say that, yes, it is bad. Like most of my lovely fellow speakers have illustrated to us using beautiful definitions and examples over the last 2 days. We've gone through the range of different biases and how they affect our work, how they affect the work we do, how it affects the work that we put out there in the world, and how people use all the services and products that we put out there. It is very rightly an unjust, prejudicial sort of judgment that we put towards a certain idea or a thing without actually understanding what the facts of that thing are. So I'm not going to spend I had heaps of slides here, which in the morning I was like, push towards the end. I'm not going to cover that because that's already been covered. So we're not going to talk about the different types of biases today, but we can all agree that they are bad most times. But I'm here today to explore when they might not be bad. And for that, I'm going to take you down my childhood lane, because all biases start there. So my cultural background and my upbringing have influenced me a lot. They've influenced my creative practice a lot. So my creative practice outside of my practice as a design researcher. The way that my father, he's a interior designer. He's a great interior designer, and the way he curated the spaces that I grew up in have influenced in the future some fun installations, interactive installations that I made at Stanford University. Mundane things in my city, like the massive outdoor laundry systems in Mumbai. These are like yards and yards of just fabrics drying out on the streets. They have inspired interactive installations in music festivals in California. So family, upbringing, cultural background, all of this has influenced my work, my creative work, in a very positive way. Something that I realized more recently is that all of this, the strict convent school I went to, the largely patriarchal society that I grew up in, all of this has also shaped my career choices. And in a very weird way, I came to realizations that some of the things that I grew up with have actually shaped what I decided to take as a career choice. Growing up, I wasn't necessarily asked to express myself with words. I was always asked to speak only when I was spoken to. I was asked to not have an opinion about things, and this was a way of showing respect to my elders, showing respect to the knowledge that they had to share with me. And as a child, I deeply internalized this behavior as being a good girl, not having too many opinions is being a good girl. And although I was not encouraged to express myself using words, I drew, I painted, I made heaps. And that has been a creative force in other aspects of my life. But you might think that what does this have to do with me being a design researcher or with bias or with this talk? But this experience has been quite foundational to me feeling at home in design research. So asking questions, listening actively, observing keenly, being a fly on the wall, making others the expert, this comes very naturally to me. I feel at home, quite literally. And it's a strange thing when your dots connect. It's like, oh, wow, that thing, and what I'm doing right now, it's connected. Over time, over the last 12 years that I've spent on the field, unknowingly, I've started to suppress my own worldview, to give space to the worldview or the values that the participants were bringing on into the room. And just like I wanted to be a good girl, I wanted to be a good design researcher, I wanted to do good research. And I actively kept my point of view, my worldview out of that. This worked quite well. This did work quite well, but I'm going to talk about what I mean by worldview. So my worldview, for me, is a combination of my upbringing, my personality, my culture, my values, my social status, my political views, my life experiences, but also my future aspirations, what I aspire to become. And I suppress all of this to be truly unbiased. My projects over the last decade or so have taken me to really interesting places, from designing remittance services for migrants to wearable technology for toddlers, strange places, and really uncharted territories. And not having your personal bias to work with has actually made learning about that subject matter, learning about people going through that experience quite easy. This has, being totally unbiased, has been beneficial in kind of in grappling through that incredible learning curve you have when you are dropped into a project, completely new context, completely new industry, and it has been super helpful. I was just soaking up everything like a sponge. Until the time I started working on projects that I deeply cared about. Projects to empower preschool teachers be their best selves for their students. Projects to help singles find lasting love. Projects to get people to reflect on their drinking and figure out how that fits with their aspirations in order to help them change their behavior. All of these projects were deeply personal for me because at times I realized I was that single person. I was that someone who was trying to get my loved one to slow down their drinking. I suddenly realized that I'm part of the audience I'm designing for. I'm not in a vacuum where I'm designing this thing for someone else. I am designing for myself. And in that weird sort of like gray area, like, is my bias, like, do I bring my bias? Is my bias my bias? Is it the user's bias? What is happening? And I started to feel very disingenuine. I started to feel disingenuine because I was looking at the user as the user, as something totally different and separate from myself when it wasn't as separate. I found it hard to leave my values and my worldview out of these projects. And it made me feel harder to be completely unbiased, which didn't sit right with me, because I was like, oh, this is me being a bad design researcher. This is not good. So, not good feeling. Which is when I started realizing that there are projects that I was working on where I was far removed from the audience. And it was easy to keep the bias out, and we have tools to work with to keep that bias out. So in our teams, before we even start thinking of research questions or before going onto the field, we come together, we make a list of our assumptions, our biases, to make sure they don't influence anything we do on the field. But with projects where I personally was part of the audience, or people that I cared for were part of the audience, how do you keep bias out? And I didn't have any tools to work through that. And that's when I realized and acknowledged that my values and worldview affect my design research practice. And I'm human after all, I'm not a robot. None of us are robots. We can't keep that separation. So my values and my worldview, which are part of my bias, affect my design research practice. And I would argue this is true for all of us, design researcher or not. Our values and worldview affect our work, affect our practice. So for me, the question changed from is bias always bad to how do I identify the bias that I'm bringing onto projects? Because I know I'm bringing it on. How do I identify it? So I turned to research like a researcher. Couldn't really find anything out there, so I looked into the realms of psychology, business development, self-help, and just set up a framework for myself. So this is pretty raw, what I'm going to share, but it is something that has helped me to reconcile with that question and to find this is my answer for that. So how do I identify the bias that I'm bringing onto projects? A 4-step process. And in the next few slides, we'll go through each of these steps and I'll explain what I mean by them, starting with recognizing your values. This is a list of the most common values. I think there are more than this. There are like some 60 or 70 of them, and the ones that are up on the screen are from I think a psychologist called Russ Harris, but you can find them very easily on the internet. What I would urge you to do is go through them and select the ones that most resonate with you. Now, these could be values that you are already practicing in your day-to-day life, that are deeply embedded in your life, or they could be values that are aspirational to you, that you really value and you want to grow into. That's fine, just mark it out. Add stuff to this, because it's not an exhaustive list. I know it's 60, but still not an exhaustive list. Add to it. Sometimes languages other than English have words or phrases that capture these values really well. Use those. For me, an example of that is Atiti Devo Bhava, which is a Sanskrit phrase, which means the visitor or the guest is God incarnated. And it's up there, it's added in that. So do what you need to do to make it your own, just 2 tips. Keep them succinct. So my list doesn't have more than 10 to 15 values, which my partner thinks is too much. But keep it succinct and illustrate it with examples. So for me, Atiti Devo Bhava means no matter who comes into my house, be it a person, an animal, an object, living, non-living, I treat it as it is God themselves. So that's how I practice that value. Doing this exercise makes that value your own. It gives it your own personality, but it also helps you communicate that with others. It gives you those specific words to communicate what this value means to you. Just a note on this. For me, the journey in this process started by recognizing my values and learning how to articulate them. But for you, you may already know what your values are, and you may be very well versed at articulating it with other people by sharing it with other people. But I do think it's super important to keep checking in with them. I find things that happen consistently in a year, my birthday, New Year's Eve, are good opportunities to keep checking in with them. You can select your own. It could be, I don't know, your favorite holiday, something. Keep checking in with them to distinguish, are your list of values, do they fall into the foundational values bucket, or do they fall under the heightened values? So foundational values are something that I illustrated earlier in the presentation with some of the examples that have shaped some of my work. So these are deep-rooted, they're deeply embodied. And heightened values are something that are, I guess, inspired by a certain recent event or a happening. This could be a happy happening, a death, birth, marriage, or it could be something, an incident where you've lost something or lost someone. It could be, it doesn't have to be a specific incident. It could be a period of something. It could be when you're transitioning between countries, you're experiencing culture shock. It could be an experience you are feeling together with the community, in your community, or something you are experiencing globally. Anything that has the potential to change your life course and it affects your values, that would be a momentary value. Now, yes, momentary values do, over time, become part of your foundational values, but we'll get to that in a bit. I'm going to just talk through 2 examples of what I mean by a foundational and a heightened value. So, Atiti Deva Bhava, this is something my grandmas have told me since I was born. Atiti Deva Bhava, I've seen my parents practice this in my house. I've unknowingly been part of that practice, so this is very deeply embodied in me. So that is what makes it a foundational value for me. Family is a value for me right now, but it wouldn't have been maybe a year and a half ago. A year and a half ago, I lost one of my closest grandmothers. And being so far away, I couldn't go see her before she left us, but being so far away, it deeply in me made me feel the loss reminded me how deeply I craved family connection with my people, with my community. And suddenly family was up there. It was a value that I deeply cared about, and I wanted to embed it in my life going forward. So that is, for me, a heightened value. Now, it's important to decide which one of these are foundational and heightened, because that's what helps you decide what you bring in onto your projects. So your foundational values, all good. Use it to bring it onto your projects. And heightened values, not so important, not so good to bring it onto your projects. I will explain both of these by illustrating 2 project examples. I will start with a heightened value. So around the same time when I lost my grandmother, the universe is strange. We were working on a project where we were looking at older people and how they connect with their grandchildren, mokapono, and what that relationship is and how sometimes alcohol plays a role in that, where grandparents aren't able to connect with their grandchildren as much as they wanted to. And for me, I was like, oh, wow, this project, and this is what I'm feeling, and should I use my personal experience to influence or to guide this project? And I was like, probably very bad idea, because this is something I'm feeling which is so fresh, so raw. I could very easily use the project to work my feelings out, which is, 1, very unsafe for me, psychologically, very unsafe for the researchers on the project, and also not fair for the project and where it's supposed to go. So as researchers, I think we have immense responsibility in making sure we don't let things like this affect our work. So that's an example of a heightened value that you should not be bringing into your work. yes, heightened values do become your foundational values over time. So I feel maybe not this year, but maybe next year if there's another project like that, I probably will use that anecdotal experience from my life to help influence the project. I'm going to talk to you about now an example of a project where foundational values are imperative to bring in. So we are recently, the most recent project I'm working on with my fellow colleagues here is where we're looking at New Zealanders from age 10 to 70, looking at how they are thinking of their careers and how they're thinking of learning and employment and how all of this works together. How do we actually make learning something that's a continuous thing over generations? And for this project, one of our core pillars is that this project is equity-led. What that means for Aotearoa New Zealand is that we are putting the most resilient people in our communities at the forefront. So that is our Māori communities, our Pacifica communities, our migrants, so on and so forth. So on our team, we have researchers who are great researchers who are great at their craft, but they are hired also to bring in their Māori, Te Ao Māori worldview. So we want that to influence the project. We want that to bias the project in a good way, because this is an equity-led project. So hopefully those two projects help you understand the difference between a heightened value or foundational value, when it is good to bring it in and when it's not. This is something, like I said, a framework that I'm still like scribbling around, like making changes. But I think what I would have wished I would have done better is communicate this with others. Of course, this is what I'm doing right now, but maybe communicate it with my team while I'm working on the project, not just like do this exercise by myself in my notebook. But I urge you, if you try this out, do share this with your colleagues. So of course, yes, with your teammates. If you are working on a new project, this is a project kickoff is potentially a really good time to talk about stuff like this. If you're working with a fellow researcher for the first time, you haven't worked with them before, good time to talk about stuff like this. But also, I think this is something very deep and personal, and you want to make sure you're creating the right safe space to have these conversations. For me, that means I know I am very sure and articulate about my values. So I think that the first step for me is super important in being able to confidently articulate my values with examples. So that, for me, goes into creating a safe space for myself and for others. This may be something different for you, so think of what that means for you. So just the last few minutes on why is it important to bring your personal worldview onto your projects. One, it is creating a trusting environment with your teammates. You're acknowledging that this is what I'm bringing onto the project. What are you bringing on? It is high quality data. If you are bringing something onto the project, some of your experiences, this is data that is deeply embedded in you, right? This is more than what you can get by an immersive ethnographic experience with your participants. This is something that you feel deeply. This is a shared experience that you and your research participants have had, so why not? It's such a rich data source. Don't want to call it experiences, data sources. Maybe I'll change that next time I give this presentation. But it also helps in conducting confident and accurate research synthesis. And so you have all the data points, you're trying to synthesize them, you know which ones are coming from your personal experience and which ones are coming from your participants' experience. And that gives you the confidence and accuracy in synthesizing your research data. Also, by acknowledging what stuff from your life you're bringing, you're honoring the information that your participants are sharing with you. You don't want to put all your stuff all over the participant stuff, right? That's not good. And I think a lot of talks that have had this underlying kind of message in this conference that I think knowing where you stand, what your values are, enables you to honor the worldview of others. I think outside of research, I think our workplaces, our communal spaces, our public spaces are getting increasingly diverse. And I think it's very timely, and I don't think there's a better time for us to be acknowledging where we come from and what we're bringing into these spaces. So is bias always bad? Well, this was my long-winded 30-minute answer to the question. I urge you to do the same. Answer this question for yourself. It will be a very rewarding experience. And please let me know how you go. This is a work in progress, and I would love your feedback. Thank you. Kia ora.